Every July 4th, Americans celebrate with fireworks, flags, and family barbecues. It's often called Independence Day, a time when we honor the birth of the United States. But what if I told you that July 4th, 1776 wasn't the day America won its freedom, and that for many people living in the colonies at that time, freedom was still just a dream? Let's take a deeper look at the real history of July 4th. What happened?
The 4th of July marks the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Not the end of the Revolutionary War. On July 4th, 1776, representatives from the 13 American colonies officially approved a document, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, declaring their intent to break free from British rule. But independence wasn't won that day. The Revolutionary War had already begun in April 1775 and would continue for 7 more years. The war wouldn't end until the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. So while July 4th was a major turning point, a bold statement of unity and defiance, actual freedom was still far from guaranteed.
Here's where things get complicated. The Declaration famously states that all men are created equal. But in practice, that wasn't true in 1776. At the time, nearly 500,000 people were enslaved in America, about 1/5 of the total population. These men, women, and children were excluded from the very freedom the colonies were demanding. Indigenous nations, who had lived on this land for thousands of years, were not included in these discussions of liberty and in many cases were viewed as enemies or obstacles to expansion. Women had no right to vote, no political power, and very few legal protections. So while the Declaration was revolutionary, it left out large groups of people whose fight for freedom would continue for generations. Despite its contradictions, the Declaration of Independence was a radical and world-changing document. It asserted that governments derive their power from the people, not kings, and that people have a right to overthrow any government that becomes oppressive. It was the first formal step toward forming a new nation based on democratic ideals. Even Frederick Douglass, the former slave and abolitionist leader, would later say that the values in the Declaration were powerful even if they hadn't been fully realized. In his famous 1852 speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" Douglass asked America to reflect not just on its progress, but on its promises. So how do we celebrate July 4th in a way that honors both patriotism and truth? It starts with understanding that history is complex. The Founding Fathers were not perfect. Some were slaveholders, and many were deeply flawed. But they also laid the groundwork for freedoms that would later expand to include more people. We can recognize the courage it took to challenge the British Empire, while also acknowledging the people whose freedom was delayed or denied. True patriotism doesn't mean ignoring the hard parts of our story. It means learning from them and making sure history doesn't repeat itself. Today, July 4th means different things to different people. For many, it's a chance to reflect on the freedoms we enjoy: speech, religion, voting, protest. For others, it's a reminder that the work of liberty isn't finished. In recent years, communities across the U.S. have used this holiday not just to celebrate, but to educate through events that honor veterans, highlight civil rights struggles, and teach history from more than one perspective. We can still enjoy the cookouts and fireworks, but we can also talk about the past honestly and make room for everyone in the conversation about freedom. So this July 4th, celebrate with pride, but also with awareness. Let the fireworks light up the sky, but let the truth light up our minds, because knowing the full story is how we move forward together. That's how we honor the past and how to avoid repeating its mistakes.